Welcome back to the Glassix Spotlight, where today we're exploring the intricacies of customer experience strategy with one of the global leaders in the field, Mark Slatin. Mark is a renowned customer experience advisor, a top 25 CX leader as recognized by CX Magazine, and a dedicated educator who currently serves as a faculty member at Michigan State University's pioneering customer experience management program. With a career that includes transforming customer experience at Sandy Spring Bank, where he led the growth from 3.7 billion to an estimated 11 billion in assets, Mark has proven his ability to drive substantial business growth through strategic CX initiatives. His achievements range from developing foundational CX competencies within organizations to designing acclaimed programs like the Trusted Guide Roadmap Masterclass. Mark's approach has not only elevated customer satisfaction, but also garnered industry wide recognition, making him a pivotal figure in shaping how businesses engage with their clients today. Mark, it's a huge pleasure to have you join us today.
Rand, thank you so much for having me on the show. Such a privilege and an honor.
Yeah, well, that's actually my privilege and honor. So, before we dive into today's discussion, is there anything exciting or even a recent accolade you think worth sharing with our listeners?
Well, first, like I said, thank you so much for having me on the show and give me the opportunity to check in with you and your listeners. One of the things I'm excited about, we'll talk, I guess, as we get into the discussion, is the importance of CX leaders to be successful in their roles. And I have put together a masterclass, as you mentioned, based on the one that I wish I had uh, when I was a CX practitioner. And it's called the Trusted Guide Roadmap. And it's a masterclass, and it's about 6 weeks, and I'm just really excited about it. I'll be probably announcing the next one in the fall, and just anyone who's a CX leader, love to talk to you more about it and talk about how I think this is sort of a 2.0 class, so we don't get into the nuts and bolts, but really a next level on how to do change leadership successfully as a CX leader.
Wow, I love the topic. I think it's huge. I think it's often get neglected for whatever reason, if it's a lack of information or knowledge, or it's just very difficult to implement. But I know this topic is top of mind to a lot of our listeners. And talking about our listeners, today's episode is called "Leading Change by Building Trust" with Mark Slatin, CCXP. So, Mark, you've emphasized the importance of trust in customer experiences and as a certified trusted advisor. How do you see trust shaping the future of CX strategies? I know trust is a very big word in many different worlds, and obviously today we're going to touch on trust in CX strategies. Can you discuss how cultivating trust aligns with our contracts and expectations set by studies like the one from Bain Consulting, for example?
Yeah, so if you want to start with Bain, what there was a study they did a while back that they called the experience gap, and where 80% of executives believe they delivered a superior customer experience to their peers, but only 8% of their customers agreed. And that doesn't mean the experience those companies deliver was poor. It just means that it floated somewhere around the average compared to their peer group. So, but according to a Deloitte study, trusted companies outperform their peers by up to 400%, and customers who trust a brand are 88% more likely to buy again. And not lastly, but not least important, and not the least of which is insignificant at all, is employees who trust their employer are 79% more motivated to do the work and less likely to leave the organization. So trust is critical in leading change in the organization. And the way I like to think about it is a lot of our focus as CX leaders is on methodologies and frameworks, things like experience design, voice of the customer, journey mapping, the ROI of CX, and getting these technical aspects of the role or the functional aspects of the role in place. And those are absolutely important. I consider CX very much a yes and sport, right? So if you think about the improv in improvisation, comedy, or acting, they have this rule called yes and. So everything you said before this point is known to be true, and this other thing about to come is true, and that is that all those things are important in the world of CX, but no real change can happen in the culture or with customers without trust. So it's the centerpiece of real change.
Wow, I love that POV actually, and I'm wondering if this any of this like regarding trust is going to be also mentioned in your next plays, or in your, probably if you talk about it in your own podcast, the Delighted Customer podcast.
Yeah, we and thanks for mentioning it. We have a variety of guests and talk about all things relative to customer experience, and that and trust is a big part of it. I early on in the podcast, I had Charles H. Green, the one of the co-authors of the Trusted Advisor and the CEO of and founder of Trusted Advisor Associates, on the show. And I mentioned this study by Deloitte. Ashley Reicheld wrote a book called The Four Trust Factors. She's on the show, and we've had a variety of guests from Horst Schulze, who's the founder and former president of the Ritz Carlton. So excited about the wide range, but like this show, I think we try to give ideas, practical advice, and useful tools for people who are interested in delighting their customers, whether they're CX practitioners, consultants, or even just business leaders interested in serving customers better.
Totally. And I want to talk a little bit about your career accolade in Sandy Springbank. So, throughout your tenure there, you led a remarkable transformation in the client experience domain, moving assets from 3.7 billion to an estimated 11 billion. These are staggering numbers. Can you elaborate on the strategic framework and organizational competencies that drove this success? I mean, I wouldn't say it's $1 million question, but it's definitely a question that, I'm not sure how you're going to answer.
Well, first, let's go back to the question itself. So, yeah, the bank grew over about a 8 or 9 year period from 3.7 billion in dollars in assets to a little over 14 billion during that time. And I wish I could take all the credit. That the fact is that CX plays an important role. Whoever is leading that or involved in that change can't take all the credit, but we'd like to think that we had some impact on that growth. Over that period of time, the organization went through a lot of change, as did many banks, and we were no different. We had a couple of pretty good size, relative to our own size, good size acquisitions happen during that time, and of course, experienced the front part of COVID while I was still there. So I think if you ask me how we approached it, initially the framework we used was one from Chief Customer Officer 2.0, a book that I had a very small part in being included in, but it was written by Gene Bliss, who co-founded the CXPA, which is Customer Experience Professionals Association, and is really one of the founders of our industry, of our profession, in my opinion. And so those are based on 5 competencies, as she called them. And we broke into teams of 5. I think we were the first one of her clients to break into teams. We built committees, if you will, around each one of these. So the first one was honor and manage customers as assets. And that is basically understanding how to ascribe a value to your customers as assets. How does your organization do that? And that took us a while to figure out. 2 is build a listening path. We can talk more about that in detail, but you kind of get the idea. We're interested in understanding how customers experience the brand and getting it right from them. 3 is align around the experience. So build in reliability. How do you do that? How do you design the experience with reliability? in it and experience and based on their journey with your organization, not from an internal product or division based map of the experience, but from their side of it. And then I sorry, I said reliability. The fourth one is reliability and innovation. And then the fifth one is one company accountable and culture. We used to just call it culture, or a culture of accountability. So how do you bring CX and embed it into the culture rather than bolt it on to the organization? So that's the model that we used at a pretty high level.
Yeah, I think it's well structured, and I think you personally saved me a lot of time by going and read the book because I just took some notes here, and bullet points actually, which is quite fascinating. So, Mark, before we dive into a specific framework like your trusted guide roadmap, could you discuss the primary challenges that organizations face in advancing their CX efforts? I mean, what are some common barriers and how have you helped overcome them? If there are like, I don't know, three or even five or even just one, that is very common in this.
I think I think there's a few things. I think for me, there are four things that stand out. One is there's a lack of trust in people making the change to improve the experience. And I say that people because sometimes there isn't one person dedicated to CX as the CX leader, like I was where I worked at the bank, or there is a chief customer officer. In some cases, there's nobody assigned to that. But whoever's involved in that is not trusted. They don't trust the data, they don't trust the numbers, they don't trust the motives. Whatever it is, there's a lack of trust. Two is the person leading that change is perceived as the hero, as being the hero or wanting to be the hero rather than the guide. And if you think about a story, and this comes from the hero's journey of a story, there's a hero, a guide, a victim, and a villain in nearly every storyline. And the hero is the person who's trying to aspire to a goal, but has some barricade, some barrier in their way. And the guide is the person who helps them get over that barrier. And it's usually because they have a lot of experience and wisdom that they've gained over time. So if you think about the movie, The King's Speech, you had the king of England with a speech impediment.
Oh,
And
I
during
love
World
that
War,
analogy. I love that
right?
analogy. Yeah.
Yeah, and he needed to inspire this nation in a time where they were being attacked by Germany, to have faith in him as a leader, and so they can overcome this horrible threat. And yet he had this impediment. He's incredibly nervous, and so he hired Lionel Logue, who was a dramaticist, who turned into a speech therapist for him and helped him overcome that fear. And there are many other examples of that, that we could share, but that is a big issue. That was a light bulb moment for me, that we as CX leaders and other people who have taken the masterclass have agreed that this is something that's easy to fall into, that trap as a CX leader, for a variety of reasons. The third thing is there's no concrete plan. So what is your plan as a CX leader? Do you have a playbook or a roadmap taking the organization through 3 years or so, going into the future? And do you have support? Have you built a guiding coalition around you to help support, to help move that rock up the mountain, so to speak? And then the fourth one is leadership does not see the value. So there's a lot of good things that an organization of any kind can do. A lot of people competing for scarce resources, typically, people, budget dollars, time, all these things, and everybody's making their case. But the CX leader has not typically done the kind of job they ought to do to prove the value, which is, in my opinion, and probably your opinion, very much there. But we haven't done a good job at those four things. So to me, those are the barriers why we don't CX leaders don't get executive buy-in, and why these programs get stalled.
Wow. I first of all, I couldn't agree more. I talk a lot of our customers are either head of CX, VP of CX, or any type of management role in CX and support actually. And not that we like talk about their pains or their struggles or anything like that, but from time to time during conversation, I do hear the things like, yeah, CX leaders should have a bigger seat at the table, or how do we get the buy-in for this idea, or I can relate totally to this. Yeah. So I know you said the masterclass 2.0 should be released somewhere in the springtime. But before that happened, um, you are obviously the creator of the Trusted Guide Roadmap Masterclass. So I'm curious to know, what are the key competencies that you believe are critical for CX leaders to master? How can they effectively get executive buy-in for CX initiatives? And if you ask me, this is $1 million question, because I know 100% know that there is no one answer to that.
Yeah, yeah. So just on the timing and the different classes. So first, you mentioned earlier at the top of the show that I was on the faculty at Michigan State University. That is not a master class. That is a master's degree program, a 20-month program to get a master's of science and customer experience management. It's the only one in North America at this point that's a degreed program at the bachelor or the master's level. So very excited about that. And that's, there's enrollment in the fall and the spring each year at MSU. Separate from my master class program, which I've run 3 of them so far, and there'll be another one introduced for the fall of 24. So I haven't announced the dates yet, but we'll be coming soon. All right. So getting to your question about what's included in that. So based on what I think the 4 problems are, you might imagine the framework for the class aligns with that. And so number 1 is earning trust. And in that first module, we talk about the components of trust, or the variables of trust, based on something called the trust equation. And each student does their own trust quotient assessment, gets a score from which to build on. And then we talk about not just individual trust, which is what's needed to lead change, but also how organizational or institutional trust can be built and the impact it has, and what are some things companies can do to help improve organizational trust or brand trust. So that's one. 2 is, we talked just before about the King's Speech and going from the idea of being the hero to the idea of being the guide. Well, there's a whole process involved in that we cover in the master class, that involves key stakeholder analysis. But how do you build the trust, and how do you become a guide to those people that you need to be part of your guiding coalition? As Cotter says in his 8 steps to change management, is build a guiding coalition. So how do you do that? So we talk through the framework of that. And then the third thing is, how do you build your CX roadmap? And so there's 5 steps to that, taking you from the current state to the future state, identifying the gaps, prioritizing projects, and then finally building out a 3-year roadmap that you can share with senior leadership and other different constituents in the organization. And that roadmap is in and of itself value that you need to prove, which is the 4th one: prove the value. And prove the value of CX, which I talked about before as being one of the huge barriers, is that we don't do a good job of that. Well, if you don't have a plan, if you don't have a roadmap, it's going to be hard to do that. So start with that, but then we go into multiple ROI of CX models to share with people, and things like net revenue retention, things like statistical inference, and other examples of ways to prove the ROI of CX in this bigger umbrella of proving the value. So I think it's just not one of those things. I think we hear a lot in CX this mantra of this constant drumbeat of proving the ROI of CX. And I'll go back to this yes and analogy of the improv world. Yes, you need to be able to do that. And it's clearly it should be a part of any CX leadership training development professional development program. But by itself, it's not going to work. You need to build the trust. You need to not be viewed as the hero, and you need to have a plan.
I really like how you frame it in terms of like how do you move. This is, I think, it's a critical step. How do you move from being the hero to being the guide? And I think I've been involved in a lot of different conversations related to the realm of CX, and I think that the way that you frame it is just, it makes a lot of sense to me. Anyway, I think it's a brilliant way to frame it. Um, and I really like that you mentioned the ROI and CX initiatives. And it kind of relate to my next question. So you've experienced firsthand the impact of integrating voice of the customer programs within business strategies. So how can companies better harness voice of customer data to enhance customer satisfaction and operational efficiency? Also, like, is the voice of customer is can be considered as a KPI in your opinion?
Well, sure. I think the feedback that you get from customers should be measured, but not in a vacuum. It should be a data point within the context of a larger story. And so, really, this whole thing is about storytelling with the data to capture the emotions of the C-suite and others, not just the C-suite, because while they're involved in making some bigger decisions around budget and other things, well, it's the middle management folks that are really helping you make the change, and the front line who are doing it each and every day. So the storytelling is a critical part of being successful as a CX leader, any kind of leader of change. For me, in terms of voice of the customer, things are starting to evolve a little bit thanks to AI and some efficiencies that we can have going forward, and the importance of gathering data that is based on operational information from customers. Let me explain. So, number one, I think it's important to ensure that you're listening at all the key points of the customer's journey. Understand what maybe the most critical or peak point of their journey is, and also the end. There's this thing called the peak and end rule, which is what customers remember from their experience, which is really what's most important, is what they remember from their experience, and that is, what is the peak of their experience, and what happens at the very end. So a good example is, I think of myself as a kid in Disney World, and they had Space Mountain. So Space Mountain was going to be the peak of my experience. I knew that before I even went there. I'd stand in line and go 5 times to this ride and roller coaster in the dark, which, as an older person, has no appeal to me, right? But as a kid, that was the
I
thing.
don't
And then the
I
end,
don't blame you.
yeah, right. And then the end is like, well, how long did it take us to get out of the parking lot? Do we have to wait an hour to get out? Because that's what I remember as well, and that's true for any. So we need to be listening to those things, and it's different for every business, and those things can change. The peak of an experience can change. So we need to listen at the critical points. We need to capture good data, good, well designed listening tools like surveys, but also listening through different channels. To me, which is the second thing, is we're listening through VOC, but surely that can't be the only way we listen. So at the bank, we set up what we call the Customer Experience Council. And so we recruited 36 business customers. We were interested in the B to B customer experience in that particular channel, and we had 3 groups of 12, and we asked them to commit for 2 years, once a quarter. We did a Zoom call, and they got to network a little bit, but more importantly, we got to ask them, about their experience, about some things we were planning and how they might react to that. What was going on at the time, what was going on at the early onset of COVID, and how that was affecting them. So That's one channel. I just this morning talked to a couple of doctors from University of North Carolina. They set up a patient and provider council. So here's another example of listening directly to the people who give the service and people who receive the service, and asking them how they felt about their experience.
So it's like
It's
building a loophole, I guess, of feedbacks in a way.
Yeah, it's yeah, and so
I
those
think
are a
that
couple of examples. You could have online forums if you're more of a SaaS company, but think about different ways that you can get information that would be in some cases timely, cost efficient, can look at both the inner and outer loop, meaning short term and longer term trends. Those are things that you need to think about really strategically, and pull in customer related data. So data both outside of the organization, external data about what's trending in the industry and where customers are going. And also, and I apologize if this is a lot, Rand,
no,
but
please.
and then pulling in operational data. Obviously, that's like, what are customers doing with their feet, and how often are they purchasing, where are they clicking on your site, what's causing them to switch channels and go to a more expensive channel, for example. So pulling in not just feedback data, but also operational data and financial data, right? So understanding what the customers, we talked earlier about value, it could be customer lifetime value or whatever metric you want to use, and maybe what that customer is worth, or that segment of customers are worth, in terms of their spend, and use that data as well, to understand what your best customers or most valuable customers, however you measure that, are reacting to the experience they have. And then the last piece of all of this is where I kind of started the conversation with around VOC, is storytelling,
Storytelling.
using data to tell a story. Your job as a CX leader and people on the team should be able to aggregate the data, collect the themes, and be able to turn it into a story that speaks in the language of the C-suite. And without doing both those things, telling a story with the data, but making it relevant to them, that is aligning with their goals and things that are on top of mind to them, and in the metrics and measurements that they tend to use, then you're going to miss the target, and then your program is going to fail. So all
So
those things.
just like in marketing, I think storytelling plays a pivotal role in the success of the CX leader within the organization. So I think that an inevitable question to ask, because you seem to excel in that department, is how can CX leaders improve their storytelling skills? Is this a skill, a characteristic, or anything that, or if there's like a one thing they can do, um, to level up their game when it comes to storytelling, what would that be?
Well, I think it's a good question, and clearly could be a course all by itself. But I think the first thing is, you know, um, there's typically no shortage of data, so you've got all this information. Ask yourself, who's your audience, right? What would they be interested in knowing about the data? What would inspire them, connect to them emotionally about the information that you have to share about, and where you're trying to go? Go with the river, go with the flow of the river. If they already have initiatives around, I don't know, revenue growth, if they have an issue around cost cutting, if they have an initiative around entering into new markets or entering into a new segment of customers, then go with the flow and make your story relevant to that. The thing that you need to be careful about, and we talk about this in the master class, is be careful about talking, and this all goes to the language of the list of the person you're talking to, your audience, is we tend to use enablers rather than outcomes as CX leaders. So enablers, examples of enablers are: we increased net promoter score by 3 points. We increased satisfaction. We did a journey map that identified the peak and end value or most important peak and end points for customers. We all of these things are interesting data. They're metrics and measurements that are CX specific, and they're to the C-suite, just jargon. So speak their language, understand their audience, understand how the story would be compelling to them. And any good story, and I guess I'll end on this note, any good story has the idea of a victim and a hero. And who do we want to be the hero? We want the people that we're sharing the story with. And this example I'm sharing with you is a C-suite. Is how do we make them the hero? And it goes back to what I said: aligning with their goals, speaking in their language. And who's the villain? We use the words and language that they've already used as what who they're trying to beat. In some cases, it may be the competition. In some cases, it may be last year's numbers. In some cases, it may be a particular geographical market or overcoming the way we used to think or the way we, legacy thinking, whatever that, identify the villain. And when you build a story, speak their language, think about what it is. Always got to start with the audience and who is their villain, and identify that and include it in your story.
I love that. And it requires a lot of emotional intelligence. It requires a lot of know-hows with data points and just know who you're facing in a room, or in today's
Yeah.
cases, in the Zoom room. um,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah, definitely. I love that. I think it has a lot of really equivalence with marketing and what we do in marketing on a day to day. Um, so, Mark, before I let you go, I want to wrap your head around this one last thing. So having guided CX transformations through mergers, acquisitions, and even a pandemic, what are some unexpected lessons you've learned that could help CX leaders navigate major disruptions?
yeah. I think that is a really good question, and I appreciate you asking it. It was interesting to go through a couple of acquisitions during that time, and same would have been true if it was a merger. Uh, we happened to be acquiring the two banks, but there the first word that sticks out to me is empathy. Empathy for both the customers going through this change, both sides, the existing customers and the newly acquired customers, and same for the employees. So understand what are the pain points and the worries of employees and customers on both sides. We did an empathy map with the C-suite to identify what we thought they were thinking, feeling, saying, and doing, which is part of an empathy map. And it really brought up a rigorous conversation about putting ourselves sort of in the shoes of all four of those constituent groups that I just mentioned. And then when you that's the first thing, is really understand, be empathetic to those four constituency groups. The second thing is treat newly acquired employees with respect and dignity. Remember, they didn't choose, just like the customers, they didn't choose you. They chose their other bank or company, whoever they were partnering with, not you. They're being acquired by you, both the employees. And so you've got a lot less trust, you've got a lot less loyalty, meaning with them. And of course, you want to keep everyone that you want to keep, everyone that you desire, you want to keep. You don't want to lose any of those people. It's part of hopefully part of the reason why you acquired that company to begin with, especially the customers and the employees, especially the book of business. So bring them in with a sensitivity that they're not, number one, they didn't choose you, but number two is they're not brand new at what they're doing. They have, one of the biggest mistakes is like, we're the know-it-all, we're the wise people, and we bought you. If you were as good as we were, you'd be buying us. And that is hero mentality, not guide mentality. It's not going to win their hearts and minds. And that's what you want. You want to keep every desired employee. So that's the second one. Treat them with dignity and respect. And then the third one is expect the speed of your CX initiatives to change, typically slower. So patience is a virtue there. and other things are going to probably take precedent over whatever you got in your on your roadmap, and that's just a reality. And that is because there's a lot of organizational risk involved as you go through something that large. When particularly at this conversion point, they call it conversion day, when the system switches over and customers from the newly acquired bank can no longer do business with their old account numbers typically, or the way they used to. They're switching to a brand new way of doing things. And so as an organization, you need to be sensitive and understand what that potential risk is, i.e., for example, could need to ramp up significantly in the call center for a whole bunch of calls just because people freak out. And there's a lot of risk of people of churn at that point, huge risk of churn, because again, they have no loyalty to you. They didn't choose you. So I think those are three: understand the pain points and worries, treat newly acquired employees with respect and dignity, and have a lot of patience as you go through that. Those are three big things, I think, when it comes to M&A activity.
Yeah, I can relate more. Actually, I was working for a company that was acquiring three companies during my tenure of 3 years.
Wow.
And I can so much relate to your points here. I think it's so true, and you really had me at empathy. It's a big word. I hear a lot of people use it very well, I have to say. um, but it's all about empathy by the end of it. And you don't get anything by being the hero, as you said, but I'll say not
Mm.
polite or just being rude to new customers or even employees in that matter. So we I don't think there is anyone that got it all figured out, and your points are really on point here.
Oh, well,
um,
thank you.
sure. For Mark, so I'm really thrilled of having you today. I'm sure this episode is going to be a success for our listeners as well. For our listeners who wants to follow Mark, I urge you to go check out the Delighted Customers podcast. I've listened to 3 episodes. Probably going to listen to the fourth one next week. It's a real jam. And if you're eager to get more CS insights, or just looking forward to Mark's new masterclass, I urge you to follow Mark's on his LinkedIn profile. It's Mark Slatin. Mark, thank you so much for joining us today.
Rand, thank you so much for having me. It's been such a pleasure.